paying £3 million more for a house that nobody wanted to buy. In 2007, this is exactly what the son-in-law of Kazakhstan's president did, closing a deal with Queen Elizabeth's favorite son. The new owner never moved into the house, it was simply left to rot, and then it was wiped from the face of the earth. This is the connection to the present day that you never even suspected. They weren't buying a house, they were buying access. And today, we will show how those 15 million received for a dead house became the first stone in the foundation of the most luxurious prison in the world. A prison that right now is rotting alive along with its prisoner. How did a fortress built on a mother's love become a gilded cage for her favorite son? There's a sound that marks the beginning of the end. It's not the roar of collapsing walls, but a quiet, monotonous drip, a drop, then another. It is born in the darkness of the attic space, soaks up the dust of decades, and begins its slow journey down. Through a crack in the plaster, down the silk wallpaper with its faded royal pattern, past a darkened portrait whose gaze has long since dimmed. Each drop leaves behind a damp trail, which over time becomes a dark stain resembling an old wound. This is happening in one of the 30 rooms of Royal Lodge, in a house that was meant to be an eternal monument to privilege. But today, its gilded cornices are heavy with damp. The velvet curtains, which once shielded from prying eyes, now absorb the cold mist seeping through the warped frames. The air here is thick, saturated with the smell of damp earth, wilted flowers, and oblivion. This house breathes, but its breath has become ragged, sick. It remembers other times. It remembers the laughter of princesses playing on its lawns. It remembers the click of the Queen Mother's heels, who for 50 years called it her sanctuary. Her hands touched these walls. Her wool transformed this place from a simple cottage into the heart of unofficial royal life. For her, it was not property, but a soul. Now that soul is rotting from within. Outside, on the 98 acres of royal land, nature is waging its silent war. The gardens, once the mistress's pride, are slowly turning wild. Weeds break through the gravel paths, ivy entwines the statues, and the roses, planted decades ago, are suffocating in the embrace of nettles. What once required constant care and discipline is now left to itself, and it is returning to its primordial estate. This is not just a house, it is a mausoleum where ambitions lie buried. It is a fortress whose walls no longer protect but imprison. Inside this slowly dying kingdom lives its last monarch, a ghost in his own lifetime, trapped in the scenery of his former greatness. A man who received this house as the ultimate sign of a mother's love, as a guarantee of his unshakable status. The 75-year lease was supposed to be a blessing, but it turned into a curse. Every drop trickling down the wall measures the time of his confinement. Every new patch of mold on the ceiling is a map of his defeat. The house that was meant to be his refuge from the world has become his prison. And this house watches its prisoner, its creaking floors, its dark corridors, its cold mirrors. They all ask the same silent question. How did a fortress built on the foundation of a mother's love become a gilded cage for her favorite son? The mold grows in silence, inch by inch, conquering the gilding, the wood, and the memory. Before Royal Lodge became a gilded cage, there was another house, a red brick ghost by the name of Sunninghill Park, a wedding gift from the Queen, which the public nicknamed South Fork for its resemblance to the ranch from the American TV series. It was a monument not to royal taste, but to the ambitions of the 80s. And when the marriage it was built for fell apart, the house was orphaned. It became a financial burden, an unwanted asset hanging around its owner's neck like a dead weight. For 5 long years, it sat on the market. For 5 years, real estate agents showed potential buyers around its empty rooms. And for 5 years, they left without making an offer. Everyone rejected the house. It was too bulky, too tasteless, too closely tied to the story of a public divorce. Its price dropped, but even that didn't help. It had become a stone dragging its owner to the bottom. And just when it seemed that this stone would never be moved, salvation arrived from the distant steppes. The savior appeared in the form of a man named Timur Kulibayev, the son-in-law of the president of Kazakhstan, a representative of a world of new money where proximity to old power is valued more than architecture. The deal was closed swiftly and quietly, but its terms were staggering. 15 million pounds sterling, 3 million more than the asking price. No one pays 3 million more than the seller is asking for a house that nobody wants to buy. The numbers didn't add up. They defied the logic of the real estate market. They whispered of something else, of favors, of services, of open doors into the corridors of the British establishment. What exactly was purchased that day? A red brick house? Or something intangible? A handshake with a prince who held the post of the UK's special representative for international trade and investment. The ability to mention in conversation that a member of the royal family was your neighbor. The most telling part was what happened next. The new owner never moved in. He didn't even try to make it a home. Sunninghill Park was abandoned to its fate. Years went by and it continued to decay. The windows were smashed, the walls covered in graffiti. It became a ghost not only for its former owner, but for the entire neighborhood. 15 million pounds were paid for the house to die a slow, humiliating death. And in 2015, its suffering ended. Bulldozers wiped it from the face of the earth, as if trying to bury the question along with it. What was that money really for? But the money remained, clean, crisp millions that formed the basis of a new chapter in the prince's life. They became fuel for his illusions. They allowed him to move into Royal Lodge, investing millions in its renovation, and striking a deal that seemed eternal. This wasn't just a property sale, it was the original sin. The moment it became clear that royal status is not only a duty, but also an asset, one that can be exchanged for cash in the quiet of closed rooms. The deal with the Kazakh didn't save Prince Andrew, it poisoned his future. The money from a dead house became the first stone in the foundation of his future prison. There is an image forged in the crucible of war and the glare of camera flashes, a Falklands hero, a helicopter pilot who returned home victorious, handsome, daring, with a mischievous smile. The nation gave him a nickname, Randy Andy. He was the golden boy, the embodiment of hopes and romantic notions of a prince. He was what everyone wanted him to be. But what happens when the flashes die down, when the dress uniform is put away in the closet, and the palace doors close behind the last guest? Behind the facade of the public persona, another reality was hidden. It could be seen not in ballrooms or at military parades, but in the quiet and twilight of his private quarters. It was here, in his most intimate territory, that a strange daily ritual unfolded. At the center of this ritual was a bed, and on the bed, his silent army, a plush regiment, a collection of 72 teddy bears. The staff had instructions, a diagram, almost a military map, laminated for durability. It clearly indicated the place of each of the 72 warriors, the large ones at the back, the small ones at the front. The two most beloved, two veterans, were to be seated on small thrones of velvet cushions on either side. Any deviation from the diagram, any mistake in the arrangement, would provoke a rage that was anything but royal. This is not a quirk. It is a symptom. The symptom of a man in desperate need of control. In a world where he was always second, in the shadow of his older brother, the heir to the throne, here, within the borders of his bedroom, he was an absolute monarch. His will was law. His stuffed subjects obeyed without question. It was a world he could put in order, a world that could not judge or reject him. Royal Lodge is not just a house, it is that same bed, magnified to the scale of an estate. It is a gigantic stage set, built for an ego that never grew up. 30 rooms, 98 acres of land. This is the last bastion where he can still arrange the pieces as he sees fit. The 72 teddy bears were just a rehearsal. Royal Lodge became the main stage. The fight for this house is not a fight for a roof over his head. It is a fight for the right to dictate his own reality, for the right to live in a world where he is still a hero, where his status is indisputable, and where all the bears are in their proper places. To lose this house is to admit that the outside world, the one that condemns him, is right. It means that his personal blueprint for the world no longer works. And the walls he so desperately defends are not, in fact, protecting a grown man, but a little boy, afraid that someone might disturb the order in his toy kingdom. In 2002, when the Queen Mother died in her bedroom at Royal Lodge, the house fell silent. For 50 years, her presence had filled these walls. She wasn't just a resident, she was its soul, its guardian. Her departure left a void that felt eternal. The house became a relic, a sacred space steeped in memory. Who could be entrusted with such a legacy? There could be only one answer. He had always been her favorite. The second son, free from the burden of the crown, blessed with charm and audacity. Their bond was special, profound, and in an act of almost maternal will, her daughter, Queen Elizabeth II, made a decision. She would give Royal Lodge to him. This was more than just a gesture, it was a coronation, a recognition of his special place in the family. The key to this house was not ordinary metal. It was forged from love and privilege. But behind this symbolic act was a deal, the terms of which staggered the imagination, even by royal standards, a lease agreement. For a term of 75 years, almost a lifetime, for the right to possess this historic estate until the year 2078, a one-time payment was set, £1 million, a paltry sum for a property worth tens of millions. And the weekly rent to the Crown Estate, the organization that formally owns the land, was set at £250, less than the rent for a tiny flat in London. This wasn't business, it was a gift, a golden ticket to a world of aristocratic stability. In return, only one thing was required: to take on the commitment for repairs, to breathe new life into the aging building by investing £7.5 million in it. For a prince who had just received millions from the sale of his old home, this seemed a manageable task. His mother had given him everything: a fortress to protect his status, a symbol to affirm his importance, a contract that was meant to secure his future. This key was supposed to open the door to a quiet, respectable life. No one could have predicted then that it would open Pandora's box. that this generous gift, born of love, would become the beginning of a curse, that the walls meant to protect would, in time, begin to suffocate, and that the most valuable gift of his life would turn out to be his most expensive mistake. His mother gave him a home, but she could not give him the wisdom to keep it. Every family has its own dynamics, its own invisible currents and hidden reefs. But when the family is royal, these currents can change the course of history. The brothers grew up in the same world, but they saw it through different eyes. One, from birth, carried the weight of a future crown on his shoulders. The other, the lightness and privilege of the second son. Charles was always a man of duty, a pragmatist taught from childhood that the monarchy is not a right but a responsibility. He saw it as an institution, the firm, as they called it among themselves, a fragile mechanism that requires constant care, economy, and an impeccable reputation to survive in the modern world. He turned off lights in empty rooms, worried about expenses, and looked with disapproval on any excess. His kingdom was built on the principles of accountability. Andrew lived in a different kingdom, a kingdom of a mother's love. He was the favorite, forgiven for things that would never be forgiven of the heir. His world was one of privileges taken for granted, taxpayer-funded flights, a lavish lifestyle, friendships with dubious financiers. All of this was part of his reality. He lived as if there were no tomorrow, protected by the invisible shield of the Queen's favor. He ignored his brother's reproaches, dismissing them as jealousy or a stinginess. While their mother was alive, their worlds existed in parallel, two different approaches to the same family name, but her death changed everything, a tectonic shift that shattered the old order. Charles became king. His kingdom of duty consumed the kingdom of privilege. And the first thing his gaze fell upon was Royal Lodge, a house just 3 miles from Windsor Castle, too close, too conspicuous. It wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of everything the new monarch wanted to change, a symbol of waste, excess, and reputational damage. For Charles, this was not a family dispute. It was his first royal decree, albeit an unspoken one. He had to prove to the nation and to himself that the firm was more important than family, that the rules were the same for everyone. Royal Lodge ceased to be a home. It became a battlefield. On this land, steeped in history, two brothers, two kings of their own small worlds, met in a final confrontation, one to protect the legacy of the past, the other to clear the way for the future. And compromise was impossible. The walls remember. They are silent witnesses, having absorbed the echoes of voices, music, and laughter from bygone eras. If you listen closely in the quiet of Royal Lodge, you can hear the ghosts of its past, not frightening phantoms, but vibrant, living shadows of a golden age. Here, in this very drawing room, Frank Sinatra sat at the grand piano. His velvet voice filled the room, mingling with cigar smoke and the clinking of glasses. At a table set with silver, Noel Coward would trade witticisms, provoking bursts of laughter, while photographer Cecil Beaton sought the perfect angle to capture the moment. This was the world of the Queen Mother. Her home was not just a residence, but a center of gravity for the most brilliant, talented, and witty people of her time. Here, politics met art, and aristocracy met bohemia. Princess Margaret, with her signature cigarette holder in hand, might be conversing with a Hollywood star, while the Prime Minister discussed the latest news with a famous playwright. The gardens were an extension of this stage. Picnics were held under the shade of ancient trees, and croquet was played on perfectly manicured lawns. For the young princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret, this wasn't a palace, but a real home, a place where they could escape the strict protocol of Buckingham Palace, which they called the office. Here, they were just Lilibet and Margaret. The house lived. It breathed elegance, dignity, and joy. Every room was filled with light and purpose. This was a place where informal history was made, where friendships were forged and legends were born. And today the house is silent. The quiet is broken only by the creak of floorboards under the steps of a solitary master. The luxurious interiors have become sinister sets for a one-man drama. The rooms that once echoed with laughter are now filled with an oppressive emptiness. The gardens that witnessed glittering receptions are slowly being overgrown with weeds. The past has not vanished. It lives within these walls, like a silent reproach. The house remembers what it is supposed to be. It remembers the glamour, the wit, and the nobility, and with its silent desolation, it passes judgment on its current occupant. It compares the brilliant era of its former mistress with the present-day reclusion and disgrace. And the comparison is merciless. The ghosts of the past aren't trying to scare, they judge. Every besieged fortress must have a garrison, even if it consists of only 2 people. Inside the cold walls of Royal Lodge, at the very center of the storm, lives not 1, but 2 prisoners. The second is his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York. Their story is one of the strangest sagas in modern royal chronicles. A marriage celebrated with pomp and hope ended in a scandalous divorce in 1996. For years, the tabloids savored the details of their separation, making them symbols of royal dysfunction. It seemed their paths had diverged forever, but in 2008, 12 years after the divorce, the unthinkable happened. Sarah returned, not as a guest, but as a permanent resident. She once again settled under the same roof as the man to whom she was no longer bound by marriage. The world was bewildered. She herself gave this union a definition that became famous. "We are the happiest divorced couple in the world." What is this? Convenience? Economic necessity? Or something deeper? A bond that outlasted both love and public humiliation. Together, they turned Royal Lodge into their own separate world, a fortress where they could be just Andrew and Sarah, shielded from the judging eyes of the outside world. She became his most loyal, and soon his only ally. When the world turned its back on him, she stayed. As the accusations grew louder, her support grew fiercer. They formed a united front, 2 people against the world locked inside a 30-room house. Recent events have added a new, poignant layer to this drama. Within the walls of this very house, Sarah has been fighting her own far more terrifying battle, a diagnosis of breast cancer, surgeries, recovery, fear, and all of it in the silence of rooms that became both her sanctuary and her hospital ward. Her illness has brought an element of fragile humanity to a story of royal intrigue and financial scandals. Now, evicting Prince Andrew means not just kicking out a disgraced aristocrat. It means throwing a woman recovering from a serious illness out onto the street. She is not just a cohabitant or an ex-wife. She is the last soldier in his trench, the last defender of his crumbling kingdom. And her presence transforms a legal dispute about real estate into a complex human drama where the lines between guilt, duty, and compassion become blurred. There are shadows that can't be banished. They seep through the thickest walls, settle on gilded surfaces, and distort reflections in mirrors. For Royal Lodge, that shadow became its master's connection to one name, Jeffrey Epstein, and to one place, a distant island in the Caribbean Sea. This friendship was built on glamour and power at the intersection of old money and new questionable fortunes. Epstein offered what the prince sorely lacked: access to a world of incredible luxury, private jets, exotic trips, and a circle of influential acquaintances who didn't ask too many questions. For a man with a limited income but limitless appetites, it was an irresistible temptation. We don't know what happened behind the closed doors of penthouses in New York or on that private island, but we do know that this friendship became a moral poison, slowly contaminating everything the prince touched. Every handshake, every photograph, every trip on a private jet. It all became part of a toxic legacy. And when Epstein's empire collapsed under the weight of monstrous accusations, the shadow of its ruins fell upon the English lawns of Royal Lodge. The home's luxurious interiors suddenly took on a sinister hue. The drawing room, where Sinatra once sang, now seemed like a place where dark deals could have been discussed. The idyllic gardens, which remembered the laughter of princesses, now looked like a stage set hiding unsightly secrets. The house was no longer just a house. It had become an accomplice, not in a legal sense, but in a moral one. It was the status these walls symbolized, the lifestyle they enabled, that made the prince an attractive target for a predator who collected influential friends. Royal Lodge wasn't just a backdrop, it was part of the bait. The connection to Epstein turned the home from a sanctuary into a crime scene. Perhaps not a literal one, but a crime against reputation, against dignity, against the very institution he was meant to represent. The shadow of the Caribbean island reached the heart of the English aristocracy and remained there forever. And now, as the sun sets behind the trees of Windsor Park, the shadows in the rooms of Royal Lodge seem longer and darker than anywhere else. The shadow that fell upon Royal Lodge acquired a name and a voice: Virginia Giuffre. Her accusations, made on the other side of the Atlantic, were like a seismic shock, with tremors that reached the very gates of Windsor. A civil lawsuit in an American court did what neither the tabloids nor public opinion could. It forced the firm to act. Panic set in. Not a loud, hysterical panic, but the quiet, cold panic of people accustomed to solving problems within the walls of palace offices. The initial strategy, complete denial and a defiant interview, turned into a catastrophe. The wall of arrogance crumbled, and behind it lay an abyss. The abyss of a legal battle where the prince would have to testify under oath, revealing details of his financial and personal life that could not be allowed to happen. There was only one way out: to pay, to buy silence, to settle the lawsuit before it went to trial. But this silence came with a price, an astronomical one: £12 million. Where does a man with an official pension of £20,000 a year find that kind of money? A desperate search began. The first hope was a chalet in the Swiss Alps, a luxury property in Verbier worth £17 million, the perfect asset for a quick sale. But the deal got bogged down in legal disputes with the previous owner. Time was running out. And so, in his hour of greatest humiliation, the prince had to turn to those whose advice he had ignored for so long. To his family, to the firm. The money came, but it didn't come as a gift. but as a loan with unspoken yet brutal conditions. Part of the sum, millions of pounds, was provided from the personal fortune of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. It was a final act of maternal protection, an attempt to shield her favorite son from ultimate disgrace. The other part was contributed by his brother, Prince Charles, the future king. This was not an act of mercy, it was a calculation. By saving his brother from court, Charles was saving the monarchy from an unimaginable reputational blow. But at the same time, he gained a powerful weapon, an IOU, even if it wasn't written on paper. The money that was meant to buy silence and end the scandal became the beginning of the end. It saved him from an American court, but made him a permanent debtor in the court of his own family. The financial noose tightened around his neck, and the one who controlled the money now controlled his fate. The £12 million paid for silence became the loudest declaration of his dependence and vulnerability. The siege began, an invisible one, without cannons or soldiers, but no less brutal for it. Royal Lodge, once a symbol of status and inviolability, became an island, and its master, a Robinson Crusoe, amidst his own splendor. Life within the walls changed. It submitted to a new paranoid rhythm. The house, which required a fortune for its upkeep, became a financial black hole. There was no more money for major repairs, for fighting the damp and the rot. The roof leaked, mold spread in the corners, and its former glory faded with each passing day. But leaving was not an option. Any departure became a mortal risk. Go on vacation? Leave for medical treatment? Even moving out temporarily so workers could begin much-needed repairs became impossible. A fear took root in his mind, a sticky and all-pervasive. The fear that the moment he passed through the estate gates, the locks would be changed, that he wouldn't be let back in, that his belongings would be packed into boxes and sent to a much more modest dwelling. Every day became a test of endurance. Every piece of news that his brother, the king, was displeased with the situation heightened his anxiety. The security paid for by the public purse became not so much protectors as jailers. He was under constant surveillance. His dependence became absolute. 30 rooms, 7 bedrooms, 98 acres of land, all this space, which once gave a sense of freedom and power, now shrank to the size of a cell. He could walk his grounds, but he couldn't leave them without the risk of losing everything. He could look at the cracks in the ceiling, but he couldn't fix them. He was a king in a castle that was crumbling before his eyes, and the only thing he could do was sit on his throne and wait. The house became his cage, the most luxurious, most expensive prison cell in the world. A gilded one, but no less real for it. The walls that were meant to protect him from the world now protected the world from him, isolating him and stripping him of his last freedom, the freedom to leave. He wasn't locked in by chains, but by a lease agreement, not by bars, but by his own stubbornness and fear. He had won the right to stay, but lost the right to live. In the besieged prince's arsenal, one weapon remained, not a legal one, not a financial one, but something living, warm, and possessing an almost mystical power. 2 small corgis, Muick and Sandy, they weren't just pets. They were the last corgis of Queen Elizabeth II, her loyal companions in the final years of her life, shadows that followed her through the corridors of Windsor, witnesses to her solitude and fortitude. For decades, the corgis had been an integral part of her image, a living symbol of constancy and domestic comfort at the heart of a vast monarchy. After her death, as possessions and titles were divided, the fate of these two creatures arose, and the queen, in her final, unspoken wish, entrusted them to the care of her favorite son. Perhaps it was her last gesture of protection, a final attempt to give him a purpose and a responsibility, to tie him to something living and good. But for him, they became something more. They became his living shield, his main emotional trump card in the battle for Royal Lodge. Now, an eviction from the house took on an entirely different dimension. It was no longer just the eviction of a disgraced duke. It was the banishment of his mother's living legacy. Picture it: bailiffs at the gates, moving trucks, and two small dogs running confused through dilapidated corridors. The dogs beloved by the entire nation, the dogs orphaned by the death of their great mistress. To throw them out would be an act of public cruelty, an insult to the memory of the late queen. Muke and Sandy running through the overgrown gardens became a powerful symbol. They are his last connection to his mother, to her love and her protection. As long as they are here, within these walls, the queen's spirit is invisibly present. They transformed a legal dispute into a moral dilemma. For the sake of economy and order, could one really disturb the last, most innocent and beloved companions of a woman whose name is still sacred to millions? The prince could lose his titles, his money, and his respect. But as long as he had the corgis, he had a legend, and he used it with cold calculation. A conflict that began as a dispute between two brothers, a personal drama of an aging generation, suddenly took on a new, far more formidable dimension. A third power entered the stage, not just another family member, but the future of the monarchy itself. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, heir to the throne. His view of the situation was devoid of sentimentality. He didn't see an uncle in trouble, but a problem casting a shadow over his own future reign. For him, as for his father, the firm was paramount. But his pragmatism had less of an old man's weariness and more of a young, ruthless determination. He understood that the 21st century monarchy could not afford the luxury of a disgraced prince occupying one of the most prestigious royal estates. Royal Lodge ceased to be merely a headache for the king. It became an object of desire for the future king. William and his family, the Princess of Wales and their 3 children, lived in the relatively modest Adelaide cottage. Royal Lodge, with its 30 rooms, 7 bedrooms, and 98 acres of land, seemed the ideal home. A home worthy of a future monarch. A place where his children could grow up, and he could prepare for his future role. This added a new personal motive to the conflict. This was no longer just Charles's attempt to sort out the family finances. It was a direct need for the new generation to clear a space for itself. Andrew stood in the way. He wasn't just a symbol of the past, he was a physical obstacle to the future. William's gaze, fixed on Royal Lodge, was that of an heir looking upon his rightful domain. He fully supported his father in his quest to evict his uncle. But behind this support lay his own self-interest. Every day Andrew spent in that house was a day taken from the future ruling family. The confrontation was no longer a matter of the past, a dispute over old grievances and mistakes. It became a question of succession. Andrew was now confronting not only his brother, the king. He stood in the way of history itself, which was moving forward relentlessly, demanding that the past give way. And at the gates of his crumbling fortress stood not just a nephew, at the gates stood the next king. and he was not prepared to wait long. On the 8th of September 2022, time stood still. Queen Elizabeth II died while the nation plunged into mourning and the world grieved the passing of an era. Within the walls of Royal Lodge, this news sounded like a death knell for his own future. For Prince Andrew, his mother's death was not just a personal tragedy. It was the collapse of his entire world. It wasn't just a monarch who had passed away. His greatest protector was gone. The invisible shield that for decades had deflected the most serious blows had crumbled to dust. While she was alive, he remained her favorite son, and that a status granted him immunity. Now he was merely the disgraced brother of the new king. The words, "The Queen is dead, long live the king," marked a tectonic shift in power. Charles III ascended to the throne, and one of his first unspoken yet decisive actions was to solve the problem that had been an eyesore to him for years, a problem named Andrew. The financial tap, which until then had only been tightened slightly, was now turned off completely. The £249,000 a year that the prince received from the Queen's private funds dried up. This stream of money was the oxygen that allowed him to breathe, to maintain the illusion of a luxurious life, and to upkeep his deteriorating palace. Now, the oxygen had run out. The ultimatum was delivered, not on paper, not in an official letter, but through a series of harsh conversations and unambiguous hints. The choice was simple and humiliating. Either he accepts the offer to move into Frogmore Cottage, a 4-bedroom house forever associated with the exiled Harry and Meghan, or he stays in his 30-room monster but loses the one thing that matters most, his security detail. The threat was crystal clear. Without the £3 million annual security budget provided by the state, Royal Lodge would turn from a fortress into a trap. The huge, isolated house would become an easy target. It was checkmate. The king had placed his brother before a choice between humiliation and fear. His mother's death didn't just change the rules of the game. It swept all the old pieces off the board. Love gave way to pragmatism, family ties to the demands of the institution. The old monarch who had ruled from the heart had died, and the new king who ruled from the head began his reign by putting his own house in order. The house was dying, not metaphorically, but physically. Its agony manifested in the small things, in the dark stains on the ceiling, in the smell of damp that not even the most expensive air fresheners could hide. But the main symptom of its sickness was the roof. It was leaking, not just in one spot, but everywhere, turning into a sieve that could no longer hold back the onslaught of the English rains. Experts estimated the cost of a complete overhaul at over £2 million, a sum the prince did not have and could never have. And so, in a desperate attempt to buy time, he made a gesture that was both a show of action and an admission of complete defeat. He found £200,000, not for a full replacement, but for cosmetic, temporary repairs. Workers appeared at the estate, patched the most obvious holes, and painted what could be painted. It was like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that required immediate amputation, a gesture calculated not to save the house, but to formally fulfill the terms of the lease agreement, to show his brother, the king, "Look, I am taking care of the property. You have no legal grounds to evict me." But the leaking roof was too powerful a metaphor to be hidden under a layer of new tiles. It became the perfect symbol of his situation. The facade of royal status, which he so desperately tried to maintain, could no longer hold back the flood of scandal, condemnation, and financial ruin. Every drop seeping through the temporary patches was a reminder that the fundamental problems remained unsolved. You can fix one leak, but the entire system is rotten. He might win another month, another year in this house, but its destruction was inevitable. This cosmetic repair was not an act of care. It was an act of desperation, a final, convulsive attempt to maintain the illusion of control while the entire world around him and the house over his head was crumbling. The agony of the leaking roof became the agony of the prince himself, trapped beneath it, listening at night to the monotonous drip of water and understanding that time was working against him. And so we are here again, at the beginning. Once more, we watch the drops of water running down the silk wallpaper. But now we understand their language. This isn't just moisture. These are the tears of a house mourning itself. Every dark spot of mold is not just a fungus, but a bruise left by pride and neglect. Royal Lodge, conceived as a fantasy of power and privilege, has outlived its creators. It has seen the changing of kings, the birth and death of princesses. It has absorbed the glitter of parties and the silence of mourning. It has witnessed a mother's gift of love turn into a weapon in a war between brothers. Now it stands as a monument not to greatness, but to its fragility. Through the overgrown garden, past the withered roses, our gaze moves to something else. In the shadow of the giant dying house, another is tucked away. A small, almost toy-like cottage. Why Booten back? The little house in Welsh, a gift from the people of Wales to the young Princess Elizabeth in 1932. It is perfect, built to a 2/3 scale, but with real roof tiles, real windows, and even running water. It was cared for. It was protected. For decades, it was a symbol of innocence, of play, and of a duty yet to be fulfilled. It didn't scream of its greatness, it simply was. And it has survived everything. It has survived wars, scandals, deaths. Today, its little roof does not leak. Its walls are clean. The tiny symbol of childhood and responsibility proved more durable than the giant monument to an adult ego. And in that lies the verdict of time. Prince Andrew's legacy became not the magnificent royal lodge. His legacy became a lesson that no walls, no matter how thick or high, can protect a person from themselves. That privilege without responsibility leads to self-destruction. And that, in the end, history remembers not the size of the house you lived in, but whether you managed to keep your own, even the smallest, corner of the world in order. Thus ends the story of the Gilded Cage and its prisoner. This is a tale not of a stone and wood, but of how the highest walls, built of privilege, crumble under the weight of one person who could not keep order within himself. For in the end, history judges not by the grandeur of our fortresses, but by whether we were able to save our own smallest house from ruin. Where is that fine line where a gift becomes a curse? And what is more terrifying, to have nothing or to gain everything and lose yourself? This story has no simple ending, and you are the one to deliver the verdict. Share your opinion in the comments. Your voice is important to this dialogue. If these reflections resonate with you, please support our channel with a subscription and a like.